Next slide, please. Welcome, and thank you for joining along with us today. This is the next installment in our Frontline Leadership Professional Development Guest Speaker Series. Next slide, please. Today's event is hosted by our Panasonic Veterans Business Impact Group, whose objectives are to bring our employees together through networking, mentorship, and community engagement, while leveraging our own unique military experiences and leadership skills to foster better collaboration within Panasonic's workforce. Further, to recognize our community of employee veterans, alongside the family and friends of military veterans, who support and encourage one another through shared experiences. In bringing together our unique background of military service, leadership, and dedication, we hope to capitalize on these strengths to better serve our companies, customers, communities through veteran recruitment activities, career development ideas, professional development, growth, and even retention. The Veterans Group is open to all Panasonic employees interested in joining. If you are a United States military veteran, please reach out to us directly to self-identify. We'll display the email address at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So taking a moment to introduce our Veterans Leadership Team members. First and foremost is Joe Howry, who is our executive sponsor of the Veterans Business Impact Group. Joe is a graduate of West Point and then served in the United States Air Force. Joe is currently the Vice President of Supply Chain at Panasonic North America. Our program has been incredibly honored to have both his guidance and his leadership among us. I am Chérie Johnston. I am the current president of the Veterans Business Impact Group for our group of Panasonic North American companies. I've been with Panasonic Avionics for 10 years now, and my background education is international business. As I often share, 3 of my grandparents served in the military. My father, my father-in-law, and my spouse were all United States Marines. My father-in-law retired finally after 30 years as a naval officer, and my former spouse is a retired U.S. Marine I met at the start of his career, so I was able to walk the course of the full 20 years with him. In 2010, our son founded a nonprofit to recognize and acknowledge the sacrifices of the military children, which I'm still the volunteer CEO today. Finally, for 5 years, I've been an official community partner to the United States Army. Next, Jared Derensberg. Jared's a former United States Marine who not only served multiple combat tours, but also upon exiting the U.S. military, he carried on working overseas as an employee of our U.S. State Department. Jared has been with Panasonic Connect for a decade as well, having entered through a special military recruitment initiative. Jared's currently the vice president of the Veterans Business Impact Group and a passionate advocate for this program. Next slide, please. So today, I'm incredibly excited about this particular professional development interview. Bob Hodgkiss is a retired United States Air Force colonel who I've had the distinct pleasure of working and collaborating with over the past few years. Colonel Hodgkiss has provided tremendous personal mentorship to both my career endeavors and to my son for his career path in engineering. Colonel Hodgkiss was first commissioned in 1985 through the Air Force ROTC program, following a distinguished graduation from Pennsylvania State University as a nuclear engineer. In 1986, Colonel Hodgkiss would already receive the Air Force Weapons Laboratory Mission Support Award. In the early 1990s, Colonel Hodgkiss would return to New Mexico State University to obtain his master's degree in industrial engineering. And then for further good measure, the colonel also obtained a master's in strategic studies degree from the Air War College in 2007. Finally, Colonel Hodgkiss obtained the Department of Defense's Level 3, which is the highest certifications in program management and systems engineering. In 2004, Bob would receive the Lieutenant General Schultz Award for Outstanding Program Manager. In 2014, Colonel Hodgkiss was a Laureate Award finalist with Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine. Additionally, Colonel Hodgkiss served in a wide variety of space research, acquisition, and operations roles within the U.S. Air Force and with the National Reconnaissance Office, or NRO, which is one of the leading U.S. intelligence agencies. With the NRO specifically, in 2015, Colonel Hodgkiss received the National Reconnaissance Office Medal of Distinguished Performance. In that same year, Colonel Hodgkiss also received the National Space Club's General Bernard Shriver Award. So ultimately, he served as the program manager of the Atlas V program at the Space and Missile Systems Center, or SMC, and as the executive officer to the SMC's commander. Prior to his final assignment, Colonel Hodgkiss was assigned to the Office of the Undersecretary of the Air Force at the Pentagon and was responsible for overseeing an entire portfolio of Launch Range Global Positioning System, or GPS, ICBM, and other space programs. In his final U.S. Air Force assignment, he served as the director and senior material leader of the Launch Systems Directorate, Space and Missile Systems Center, Air Force Space Command, Los Angeles Air Force Base. Just incredible accomplishment. And then he directed the development, acquisition, and sustainment of launch systems required to launch our national satellites at the Eastern and Western ranges, and was the program manager of the $1 billion plus per year Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle program, which is also known as the EELV program. Colonel Hodgkiss personally led a 550-member program office team responsible for more than $15 billion in contracts, up to 10 launches a year, and the creation and execution of the Air Force's new entrant certification program. Overall, he led a collaborative government and industry team that reviewed and certified more than 40 launch missions while serving as the mission director for 4 of those individual successful missions. So today, Bob is the president of CEO of Hodgkiss Consulting, LLC, a private firm supporting new and established business development strategies and aerospace industry products for both the commercial and the government customers. And finally, he serves on the board of advisors to 3 space industry small businesses. Next slide, please. In today's discussion, it's centered around, servant leadership with both honesty and integrity. This title is based on Colonel Hodgkiss's unwavering dedication to service before self, mentorship of others, and genuinely leading by example. Next slide, please. So after an illustrious 30-year career, we're really looking forward to hearing from Colonel Hodgkiss today. Colonel Hodgkiss, sir, we invite you to please honor Panasonic by sharing some of your thoughts and wisdom with us today on servant leadership.
Well, good morning, Chérie, and thank you to you and to the entire Panasonic team and your veterans group here for this opportunity. I'm honored and hope that I will be able to share a few thoughts based upon my career, both as a military officer and as a volunteer in scouting and elsewhere. And so I'll just take a few minutes to provide a little background on who I am, where I've been, the journey that I've been on as a leader, and use that journey for some examples to share some thoughts on leadership in general. So to kind of fill in a few additional background pieces on the intro that Chérie gave me, I was born into an Army family. And so my dad was an active duty Chief Warrant Officer. I was born at Aberdeen Proving Ground, lived there for a little over a year before the family moved to Fort Bliss, Texas, where my brother was born. And then in '65, we moved back to Western Pennsylvania, where both my mom's family and my dad's family lived, while Dad had a remote tour to Okinawa and Vietnam. When he came back, Mom decided that she'd had enough of active duty, and so Dad decided to transfer to the reserves, and we settled in Western Pennsylvania. Dad eventually retired as a CWO4 with 30 years of service. Growing up, not only did I have my father as a U.S. military member, but I had family members from all the military branches and the Coast Guard. And so I had a chance to learn from them, see them, learn about their experiences, and we had a chance to visit military and Coast Guard facilities around the country when we would go on vacations and go to visit family. And so I was able to see how each of the different services treated their people, where they made their investments, how they kept their bases, and so on. And over time, that helped influence my decision to eventually join the Air Force. While I was growing up, I became a scout, first in Cub Scouts and then in Boy Scouts, had 10 years as a youth member, and they really grounded me in the Scout Oath and the Scout Law, and also started me on my journey as becoming a leader through both personal experience and different training courses. Outside of scouting, I was actively involved in my church's youth group and on my high school speech and debate team. So when it came time for college, um, family we were doing okay, but from a financial standpoint, I needed scholarships to help pay for school. So I applied for both Air Force and Navy ROTC scholarships at Penn State, was offered 4-year scholarships to both, but I thought about it for a bit and realized that if I went Navy, I'd probably spend a lot of my life beneath the waterline somehow, and maybe that wasn't the best thing for me. And I'd also noticed that the Air Force seemed to be taking care of their people a little bit better, had nicer bases, and they really advocated advanced education. So I selected the Air Force ROTC scholarship, and that got me through school and helped me develop as a military leader. When I was there, I had many different leadership positions, and my final one as a cadet was as the cadet wing commander for Detachment 720 at Penn State, and was commissioned a lieutenant in '85. So that started me on my active duty journey, which took me first to New Mexico, where I spent almost 6 years in a variety of positions. And that's where I learned the business the Air Force told me I was going to be for them, not a nuclear engineer, but a program manager. And so a program manager has to have many different skills about contracting and the strategy of how the government's going to buy things, finances, policies, system engineering, and so on. I began to immerse myself in those different activities. And while there, was exposed and became a part of my first space program called the Relay Mirror Experiment, which was at the time funded by the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization. People used to call it Star Wars, but it was what President Reagan created to help ensure the defense of the U.S. And so we were an R&D program working with Ball Aerospace was our prime contractor, and I learned about satellites and the entire space ecosystem through that. I didn't get to fly that mission, however, because I got pulled off into other jobs at the lab when the launch was delayed, and I ended up with my first tour as an executive officer, which is a member of the personal staff of a senior commander. And you review all the paperwork that goes into the boss's desk. You field most of the phone calls that come into the office. You're given trusted tasks to go off and do, and you really get to see how units operate at the strategic level because you're kind of the right arm of the commander. And that gave me great insight into leadership within the military, but also being able to contrast that with work I was doing with scouts at the same time. In the summer of '91, I started my first of 3 assignments in my career out to Los Angeles Air Force Base, which is located in El Segundo. There's no runway there. Our runway for the base is LAX, which is literally within 2 miles of physically of the base. And I worked on a series of highly classified programs, which as part of what was called the Secretary of the Air Force Special Programs, which I can now say, but couldn't then say was part of the National Reconnaissance Office. And while there, I had the experience of working on a highly performing team. And so if you remember from your military training of the stages of team development of forming, storming, norming, and performing, it's hard to get to performing, but when you're there, it's a marvelous thing. And that was the first time in my career that I actually experienced that. After about 3.5 years, I was off to Colorado to the Aerospace Data Facility at what was then Buckley Air National Guard Base, now Buckley Space Force Base, I had a chance to work 24-hour operations as a mission planner for space systems, and then was assigned to work as a responsible engineer to take a system which was not performing well on the operations floor. The director of operations said, "Get it off my floor, go fix it before you bring it back." I worked with the program office who had created that system. We fixed it, we took care of the policy, we took care of the training and the technical issues, and got it back into operations. And based on that job, I was then assigned by the director of engineering to be the site infrastructure RE. And that meant I was responsible for all the technical infrastructure of the largest ground station that my organization had at the time. So all the communications networks, all the support systems, the backup power and so on, all were in my portfolio, and I had to get them all ready for Y2K. For some of you that you may be going, "Oh yeah, I remember that," and others may be going, "What was that?" Well, we had a lot of concern about what happened to computer systems when we clicked over to the year 2000, and I led our site's planning for all of that. And while there, I was also selected to be a member of a source selection team for improving the infrastructure of that site. And a source selection is the government's process for competing its work and choosing in a structured way who will be the provider of the capability that the government needs. From there, I was off in early 2001 to headquarters, National Reconnaissance Office in Chantilly, Virginia. And I was serving as a program manager for developing infrastructure. And while there, I was also selected to become the division chief because the officer who was supposed to be there got reassigned. And so within 4 months of my arrival, I already had 2 full-time jobs and eventually picked up a third one when one of my division employees got a new assignment too. But through that, I was able to work with different cultures, work with different organizations, solve some very challenging technical decisions. Infrastructure is not very sexy, but it's very important. You got to make it work. And I had to learn to balance all the stresses of these different jobs with the fact that my wife and I had a new baby at home. And so all these things going on together made life very interesting for me. When I left the NRO, since I was in the DC area, I went over to the Pentagon. And there I worked on the acquisition staff of the Air Force, working on the budget and policy and acquisition related issues for the global positioning system and the nuclear detection system. In a job that's in the Air Force is called a program element monitor, or PEM. And you are the responsible person for taking care of all those issues, keeping senior leaders informed, and working all the coordination both within the Pentagon as well as interagency in the DC area and with the Congress to be able to explain the budget and other policy issues to all those stakeholders. From there, I got hired to come back to Los Angeles Air Force Base, and as Chérie mentioned, I became the Atlas V program manager. So as up to that point in my career, I'd done satellites, I'd done ground systems, and now as a lieutenant colonel, I'm being hired to be the program manager of launch vehicles, something totally different. But that was a great experience because Atlas V was finishing up as a commercial development, and it gave me a chance to learn the launch business. And through that, I was also able to learn how to handle some very strategic challenges that a program might experience, because right in that time frame in the early 2000s is when all the big satellite programs started experiencing launch delays. And both Lockheed Martin, Atlas V provider, and Boeing, the Delta IV family provider, were getting ready to exit the business at the time. And the Undersecretary of the Air Force, Pete Teets, brought them together and suggested they talk and see if they could form a joint venture. That eventually became United Launch Alliance. And I was part of the program office team that figured out how we were going to change our contracting approach to be able to go from very competitive contracts from 2 providers into a single provider kind of situation. And so there was a lot of strategic issues to overcome, and contracting and other actions that we had to work through in addition to flying some missions. The center got a new 3-star commander about 2 years into my tour at SMC, and that incoming 3-star Lieutenant General Mike Hamill hired me to become his executive officer. And so, as I mentioned, when I worked for the colonel, you kind of see everything at that strategic level. Now I was seeing it at the 3-star command level, being the boss's right hand, fielding all those phone calls. You never knew who was going to be at the other end of the phone, a 4-star, a Secretary of the Air Force, someone at that level, a senator. You just had to be calm, cool, collected, be able to make snap decisions about who got priority on the boss's calendar, things like that. Coming out of that tough year, I was sent to Air War College, which is kind of a professional renewal year. Not only do you get a chance to work and earn that master's degree, but you're interacting with senior officers from all the different services and with international officers. Each of the sections that we had at the college had 3 international officers in them, and they were wonderful for providing new perspectives on things and helping people like me who grew up in acquisitions better understand how coalition operations really work and the importance of fostering those relationships. When I finished at Air War College, it was back to the Pentagon again. Notice there's kind of a theme here, space acquisition, kind of a small community, but now I'm a division chief and I have this big portfolio of programs that I've got to support. And that was a lot of time working with some very senior leaders at the secretary level, all the way up to supporting meetings with the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Transportation on some GPS-related interagency issues. You get to see how your government works when you're working at that level, not just within the Pentagon, but also interagency and with the Congress. And then finally, I came back to LA here for my 3rd time in the summer of 2008 as the Vice Wing Commander for the Launch and Range Systems Wing, as the unit was called at the time. I also had an additional duty as the alternate base magistrate, and that was because the Judge Advocate General at our base said, "I like the way you think, people trust you, you're unbiased, and I need somebody other than the base commander who can authorize search warrants or serve as a base magistrate when that base commander is not present." And so that was a fascinating new opportunity for me. And I can say that, yes, I have authorized federal search warrants, not something you normally hear from an active duty Air Force officer. While I was there at LA, I served as both the deputy and then the program director of the program. And together, all that time added up to just a few months shy of 30 years of service. Since I retired in 2015, as Chérie mentioned, I've got a consulting business. I do that part-time because really I'm husband, dad, scoutmaster, and volunteer. I became Scoutmaster of Troop 788 in Redondo Beach in the summer of 15 and continued to serve in that position. I also serve in different leadership positions within Scouting, including the Order of the Arrow, which is Scouting's honor society, and in their adult leader training program called Wood Badge, which is their 5-day-long training course. I have served multiple times on that staff and in the process of planning to lead the 2024 offering of that course here in my local council. I do work with 3 different space startups as a member of the board of advisors doing different things. And then as a community volunteer, every Monday morning, my wife and I are delivering Meals on Wheels here in San Pedro. So that theme of taking on the hard problems, working with others, and leading with integrity and honesty has kind of built throughout my life. And so that was building through a number of experiences, and I'll share a few of those with you just to get a sense of how I became the person I am today. So as a young lieutenant on that first space program called Relay Mirror Experiment, my boss was a captain, his boss, the program manager and branch chief, was a major. We got called into the office of the colonel who led our directorate. And in his office, he looked us in the eye and said, I need you to keep 2 sets of books. One we're going to show our customer, SDIO, or Strategic Defense Initiative, but the real books are going to be where I'm going to tell you to spend their money on the products or programs that I want to do. We excused ourselves pretty quickly, went back to the office and said, we can't do that. That's not a lawful order. And my branch chief contacted the base legal office. The colonel retired shortly thereafter. But what I learned from that is you got to do the right thing, even when it has the potential to be very challenging. And knowing where those boundaries are and not to cross them, it was great to see the 2 levels of command above me right away say, we're not doing that, because that was my instinctive reaction standing in the colonel's office. And so I learned from that, and I remember that I will never give that kind of order nor ask my people to do something illegal, unethical. As a captain, working on that wonderful rapid prototyping program, we had a very highly integrated government contractor team, and we had many different technical and program management challenges to come. We went through all those stages: forming, storming, norming, and performing, and we delivered our capabilities on an accelerated schedule, and they really worked well once we got to launch them. And when you work on a team where you inherently trust everyone to do the right thing, and you can help each other through challenges, that is just a marvelous experience. And being able to recognize that and help others get to have that same kind of experience is a wonderful thing in life. As a major working at the National Reconnaissance Office, I mentioned I had 3 different jobs: the division chief, the program manager, and now a program manager of a complementary multi-site effort. And that really taught me the need to prioritize, to build resiliency through those challenges, and the need to take care of myself. I had to make time to get to the gym, to step away once in a while, spend time with my family, give my wife a break from caring for our young son. I had to make time to do that all. Didn't always get a lot of sleep, which was part of the challenge too, but you had to learn to handle multiple tasks simultaneously. I moved then to the Pentagon, and a seminal thing for me was sitting in the office of the Undersecretary, helping him prepare to testify under oath in front of multiple congressional committees about the budget for not just GPS, but for all the different space programs. And so not only was I trying to help him understand what are the contents of the budget, what kinds of questions is he likely to get from the Congress, but that he was going to be under oath. He had to trust what I was providing to him, that the information was accurate, that the arguments were sound. And so you kind of swallow hard when you understand that under penalty of perjury, this person here, the senior leader, is trusting what I do. And so everything has got to be your best work and your most honest work. And that stuck with me and continues to resonate to this day. So I get back to Los Angeles now for my second time, and now for my third time, and all 3 families of the rockets that we had were grounded for technical issues. Our budgets and contracting processes were a mess, and our organization was really lacking the skills needed to recover from these situations. Working with my boss, Colonel Gary Henry, together, a lot of hard work. We got the rockets flying again, but in the fiscal year 2010 budget cycle, we flat out broke the Air Force's budget by more than $1 billion after reviewing the cost estimates to fulfill mission needs. Needless to say, Gary and I weren't very popular, not just at our base, but within Air Force Space Command and the Air Force. But the bad news was still true, and it led to a prioritization of military manpower being assigned to Los Angeles Air Force Base and a recognized need to create a new acquisition strategy. And I was designated the person to begin creating that. That was all being done in a political environment in Washington, D.C., where our program at the time turned out to be the most controversial one in the entire Department of Defense, even more controversial than the tanker program, which got a lot of headline press coverage at the time. So it was a lot of work to shield our team from all those political machinations back in the Beltway so they could keep their heads down and focus on what was vital to the program's success. Within a couple of years, we got the entire program rebuilt, rebaselined, new contracts in place, and we achieved real savings of more than $4 billion through that new approach. We, the seniors, took the heat on that, and we enabled our team members to shine when we gave them the right training, the right support, and the right opportunities. And so that's something that I definitely learned as a leader of, kind of train them, trust them, let them lead, and the boss takes the heat so that the folks who are doing the mission can not be distracted by that. So after retiring, I recognize that helping others succeed is one of my core values, and that helping others succeed is well aligned with both the Scout Law and the Air Force's core values. So I have, as I mentioned a moment ago, several positions in scouting. All of them allow me to work with scouts and other adult leaders to help them be successful. And as the director of the upcoming Wood Badge course, I'll be developing the staff members to model servant leadership and to teach its principles to our participants. As I work with our scouts, they can very quickly determine if I'm living the Scout Oath and the Scout Law. I can't expect them to live it if I can't live it myself. So leading by example is something that I do all the time as a Scout leader. As an advisor to startup firms and as a consultant to many businesses, I have to work hard to understand their vision, their missions, their values and needs so that I can provide meaningful ideas and help support them in what they're trying to do and succeed. So all those together adds up to my professional reputation, and that's been built over decades of experience. And through that experience and being very ethical in behavior, that's the foundation of my business. And so continuing to live that honesty, integrity, that's the core to who I am. It's also the core for me being successful in business. So taking all those thoughts together, I came up with a few insights on leadership that I've gleaned. And the first is your education doesn't define you. It enables you to pursue your interests and dreams. So I have 2 engineering degrees, but I am not the right person to solve the hard technical problems. Now, I was the leader of the launch program, but I wasn't the guy solving the rocket equation. But I do have enough of a background and experience to understand how a system works or not, and how they interact with others. And I also understand the business challenges associated with the technical efforts and the need to have a culture of continuous improvement. So regardless of what your degree or your education is, it's a starting point. Don't let it constrain you for achieving your dreams. As an engineer and having supervised many engineers, they love to solve technical problems, but they often try and avoid dealing with people. And so they love the technical problems because there's usually at least one bounded solution. And to find it, you just have to apply the objective techniques, the scientific method, and that can be mastered. But when you're working with people as a member of a team or as a leader, it's a different skill set and often trying to deal with unbounded challenges. An organization is comprised of people, so learning to be both a good follower and a good leader provides many more opportunities to advance your career. Next thing I could share with you is that many of our technical and business communities are relatively small. So it's important not to burn bridges, or if you're going to burn it big. So I encountered members from my ROTC class, my ROTC summer camp flight, classmates in my early acquisition training courses, officers from early assignments throughout the nearly 30 years of my career. Our careers just kept intersecting at several different places. And if I'd burned bridges, it would have made it much harder to work with them. And in several cases, the people I'd met initially became my bosses in future assignments. So something to consider is be careful when you burn a bridge, because in these different communities, they're pretty small and word of that will travel quickly. Next thing I'll share with you is that a good leader helps their team members become successful, as those people want to become, and you're not intimidated when some of your former subordinates surpass your own career achievements. Creating a legacy of a stronger team and organization is the sustainable path in the military, in business, in scouting, in any kind of organization. So at the moment, my personal legacy includes a U.S. Space Force 3-star general, a U.S. Space Force 2-star general, a retired Air Force brigadier general, a 2-star equivalent senior executive service civilian, and a retired Air Force Chief Master Sergeant E9, as well as many colonels and other high-grade civilians. Many of my former employees who chose to leave the Air Force went on to become, for example, an administrative law judge at the U.S. Patent Office, deputy director of a multi-billion-dollar rocket program, a foreign service officer, and a civilian instructor at the Space Force's primary training unit. I tried to find the right fit for, or the right support for folks who said, I love serving my country, but it's time for me to do something different. And I help them figure out a path to try and achieve their dreams. A good leader is willing to do that and help others succeed. As you become that good leader, one of the ways that you develop that wisdom and judgment and experience is to volunteer for or don't flinch when you're asked or assigned to take responsibility for really challenging tasks. In doing so, you'll help your organization overcome sources of pain or drag, to use a flying term, and you'll gain valuable experience that can be employed in later jobs. Several times I became the fix-it or make-it-work guy to overcome issues that had technical, organizational, policy, security, personnel challenges all intertwined with each other. And learning to deal with complex situations is a life skill and makes you much more valuable to your organization. I definitely learned that a leader has to learn to trust your team members. You can't do everything yourself, and sometimes you have to make hard decisions with little time to prepare. I experienced that directly shortly after becoming the Atlas V program manager. After only a couple of months in the position, I was briefing the program director, who, oh, by the way, was the original Atlas V program manager, regarding the risks that we'd identified and mitigated for the upcoming second launch of that rocket. I had to trust the inputs from my Air Force, Aerospace Corporation, and other support contractors, and the prime contractor, Lockheed Martin, to create my own final recommendation, including the risks associated with some key pieces of flight hardware. A few years later, when I was back as the program director, I was signing risk assessments for many important missions that formed the basis of my 3-star commander's written assessment and risk posture that was sent directly to the Secretary of the Air Force, who was the indemnifying authority for losses above $500 million if there was a bad day of a launch failure. So directly accountable for all of those and having to trust the work of others. And then the final thing I'll share is that learning to be a leader is a journey, not a destination. My journey began when I was a 12-year-old assistant patrol leader in the Vampire Bat Patrol of Troop 1012 in Washington, PA, and it continues today. I'm still learning in several of my current roles, and I firmly believe that continuing to learn, as well as sharing your learning and experience, is a path to prevent becoming irrelevant. And so with that, I'll pause for a moment and see if there might be any questions. But again, I very much appreciate the opportunity to meet with you today and share some thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, wow, just absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for all of that, for walking us through your career journey, but also just those sage pieces of leadership wisdom that you were able to share. Those are just incredible. I would encourage anyone that is on the call live, if you want to go ahead and please put your question in the chat and we'll get to those. I'm going to ask a few that I had planned and then we'll ask those as well. So please do that now. So, Colonel Hodgkiss, specifically to your career with the U.S. Air Force and NRO, it's afforded you really a front row seat to our nation's historical military rise and then evolution within the space domain the past few decades. Will you speak to the key lessons that you would want every single either American or even global citizen to understand about the importance of space to our daily way of life today?
Sure. So several thoughts come to mind, Cherie. First is that space systems support you many ways every day. Examples will include the navigation app that's on your phone that's enabled by Global Positioning Service or GPS, to the time synchronization of the computers that we're on and the phone networks that you use. Those are all provided by GPS. Weather forecasts are based upon space data provided from space. Precision agriculture is enabled by space systems and provides the food that we eat. We use it for disaster monitoring. Look at what we're learning from Maui, from space systems and the communications that are provided by space systems out of those different parts of the world. And global news is often sent over space systems. So keeping that space domain safe and available to all users is really critical to maintaining the way of life to which we've all become accustomed. Another thing it's important to understand is that space is rapidly becoming congested. Over many decades, there were only maybe a few hundred active satellites, and other pieces of debris that were either dead satellites or rocket bodies and so on. But now there are thousands of active satellites, and many more thousands are planned to be launched in the next few years. And so it's going to be really important to work with the international community to form norms of behavior to address topics like how do we minimize that debris? How do we dispose of those dead satellites? What are the responsibilities amongst the parties to adjust orbits to prevent orbital collisions when orbits are projected to intersect? How do we ensure that everyone has freedom of movement will be important. And that will all together establish the framework for what is expected to become anywhere from a $1 to $4 trillion space economy. So it's important that this, as the space business is really accelerating, that internationally there's a collective assessment on norms of behavior and rules, just like we have in the air domain, just like we have on the high seas. Also need to recognize that space is becoming a contested environment. Multiple nations have developed technologies to interfere with, negate, or destroy satellites and other on-orbit assets. So again, establishing and maintaining the norms of behavior, as well as the domain awareness of what's going on up there, is really important for the military, for civil organizations like NASA, and for commercial entities. Preventing the creation of new debris clouds, for example, that could render an entire orbital regime unusable should really be a global interest. Some quick thoughts there.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And that was really illustrative, of the many complexity and challenges. It's not just how do we use it today, but how may we lose it in the future if we're not responsible with that. Next question, specific to the EELV program that you were running. At that point in your career, you're now leading near the top of one of the U.S. military's most crucial and costly programs in our nation, which certainly for you involved an unbearable amount of pressure to perform. I know you did highlight a little bit earlier when you were speaking about, self-care and being available to family, but how did you personally deal and or just literally cope with that unique level of responsibility of trust being bestowed upon you by our U.S. government on that day-to-day basis, to keep being effective? And second part of that, next, how do you manage something of that sheer scale just to keep everything organized and moving as efficiently as possible forward? How do you juggle all of that?
So to start with the first part, how did I deal with that level of responsibility, trust, and stress? I had to stay focused on the long-term objective. What are we trying to do? And knowing that we're not going to get there immediately was okay, but I knew the path that we'd laid out to get there, and we'd take time to celebrate those interim successes. And so being able to recognize those milestones along the way was important. To enable my team to achieve those milestones was important. And then on the personal side, I would sit down with my staff and look at the calendar and lay out, I'm going to take leave here. And I would put it right on the calendar that I made available in a read mode for all the people in my organization. Because part of transparency is, how the boss spends his time tells you what the priorities are. So they could see what meetings I was taking, when I was on leave, and things like that. And so they could see that if the boss is showing that he's taking his leave, and I never lost a day of leave in my career, that it was okay for them to plan their work and plan their leave too, because everybody needs to recharge and step away because you come back more effective, if no other reason, as well as there are more things in life to do. And so I tried to lead by example. And so when I would go on leave, I would do my best to not completely get off grid, but to really focus on the ability to visit with my family, decompress, go do things that were enjoyable. And my team needed to see me doing that. And then the second part of your question, Chérie, on trying to keep the scale of everything together. So for me personally, I don't know how many of all of you in your audience are familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality test, but that has identified 16 different personality types, and I am a strong ISTJ. And as an ISTJ, I like understanding the details of things. So I just dove into the details of the program. But in doing that, it enabled me to find the holes, the duplicates, the mismatches, and other corruptions in the structure of the program in many different facets. And so by being able to find those and take action to address them, allowed us collectively to become more efficient and effective. It also allowed me to hold my team members accountable, because when they realized that, hey, the boss knows the details of what I'm doing, they had to up their game. And I could very quickly figure out whom can I trust, whom do I need to work with, and whom do I need to find a new job for because they're not the right fit here. And that made it a lot easier for the organization as a whole to become much more efficient and effective.
Wow, that's incredible, like you said, into the details and the level of foresight that you were not just in that day to day, but you were looking into the future. And just wonderful about the example of sharing the calendar and transparency. And this is my plan, because we don't always see that in leadership. I know for sure where I think it mitigates some of the anxiety or stress that people following feel is the unknown, right? When they don't know what's coming, when they don't know, they hear quiet conversations, but they don't have that full transparency. So I think that's huge. That you shared that. So final question for me, because I do want to jump over to our audience. What challenge does the United States face moving forward that keeps you personally awake at night, that you foresee the next generation of the U.S. military leaders encountering, or your children's generation that's going to grapple with in terms of your area of expertise?
That's a great question. And so I think probably the biggest challenge that I see, and it's one that's been kind of systemic for a while, is that the Department of Defense's acquisition and budgeting processes just don't operate at the speed or with the flexibility needed to enable our guardians, our soldiers, our sailors, our Marines to field new capabilities, improve resilience, and respond to emerging threats. There are many senior leaders today, as well as a lot of folks in the field, who have the desire to move faster and embrace more risks to address those challenges. But there are also some very deeply entrenched bureaucracies and special interests who've invested years of time and resources to enable them to be successful in the status quo. And this culture is really hard to overcome. Now, I know that there are several ongoing exercises and activities to try and improve performance, and the DoD can do a lot of things internally to reform and improve itself, but they're also all dependent upon the Congress to pass the annual Defense Authorization Act and the Defense Appropriation Bills that establish the legal authority and the funding for the DoD. Fiscal year 1997 was the last fiscal year for which there were no continuing resolutions, meaning we actually passed those bills on time. The concern I have is I haven't seen the Congress willing to just discipline itself to routinely pass key legislation on time or to consider redefining the nature of how funds are appropriated. There's an ongoing commission on planning, programming, budgeting, and execution reform. They, in fact, just a couple days ago released an interim report. We'll see how the Congress responds to that, but those recommendations aren't even due for about another 6 months. And then the Congress, through the, in an election year, big election year, will be trying to juggle that with many, many other national priorities to figure out a way ahead. And in the meantime, potential adversaries aren't dealing with these same kind of challenges, and they're able to innovate and make progress faster. And so that is a systemic strategic issue that does kind of keep me up at night. I know there are some really smart people working really hard to try and address it, but there's going to have to be a lot of will to do that. And unfortunately, in the history of our country, it often takes a big oh my moment before people will focus on a particular issue and address it. So hopefully we don't get to that oh my moment before some good forward progress is made.
Yeah, no, absolutely love the way that you termed that, that unfortunately sometimes it takes a shocking, incident before people actually start to really focus on the problem itself. So from our audience, Colonel Hodgkiss, how do you deal with fear with new complex situations? For example, imposter syndrome.
So that's an interesting one. The way I personally have dealt with fear is remembering who I am and what got me there, and my belief in myself to recognize what's real and what's not, and to recognize that a lot of fear is more based on self-perception than in true risk. And so a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the way to begin to address it is to start moving forward and then learn from the experience that you're having, and you can adjust your course. But if you just sit there and wring your hands, that's just gonna build on itself and you'll get nowhere. So you gotta start. So you gotta use your experience, pick the best course you think might work and try it. It is much better to do that than to try and sit back and fully optimize a no risk or low risk plan, because you just won't get there in time. So take it head on. It's probably not as bad as you think it is, and seek the input from others too, and trust your team.
No, that's excellent advice. And I know fear can be paralyzing in personal life and business. So yeah, that's just absolutely sage advice. Thank you so much. Next question. As a scout, were there any specific skills or values that you personally took into your career with the military? As a leader in the Scouts, is there any skills or values from your military experience that you've passed back onto your troop today?
Great question. I think I would simply start with the first point of the Scout law. A Scout is trustworthy. And if you just pause for a moment and think about how different the world would be if everybody was just trustworthy. So I worked really hard on maintaining the trustworthiness of my own, as well as trying to help my Scouts understand why that is so important and why it's the first point of the Scout law. And I do the same thing with adult leaders of we need to model the behavior, the values that we expect our Scouts to have, because the program is not set up to create Eagle Scouts. The program is set up to develop people of character who will be able to make ethical decisions based upon the Scout Oath and Law for the rest of their lives. And so when you keep that in mind, the scouting program uses things like camping, like advancement, and so on to develop those skill sets, but to reinforce how the oath and the law become the bedrock of an individual's character.
No, that's absolutely Perfect. That I like how you tied it back to actually, to the motto. And I'd be curious how many of today's, senior leaders within our nation were actually scouts or were, Eagle Scouts ultimately. So final question from our audience. In your work with the startups you mentioned, how have you managed any moments where you needed to communicate honestly on projects you were advising? So it sounds like they're saying when you had to be very candid about what they were working on.
So in order to have that kind of conversation, you first have to have a relationship with the client or with the company's leaders. And so when I begin working with them, I really work on trying to getting to know them as people and getting to understand what is it you're trying to do, not just what is your better mousetrap or new service, but where are you trying to go with it? What are your aims? And sharing some challenges that I've overcome just so they can get to know me. And so then, as I begin to work with them and I'm giving them some candid feedback, I try to always give them the context for my feedback. It's not what you're about to do is dumb. It's if you go this direction, here are the challenges you're likely to overcome, or here's the policy brick wall you're about to hit, and maybe we need to look at a different approach. And so it's not always just no, no, no. It's I recommend this, here's why, here, can I help you work on some alternatives? That approach is generally much more effective than I'm the sage and I tell you that I'm right and you're wrong. That just doesn't work, especially with startups. But working with them has been wonderfully rewarding, and the speed and the energy and their willingness to be coached and mentored has been great. And when I contrast that with just the nature of working with many of the usual suspects in the defense industry, they've got large bureaucracies too. And at least understanding how they work and their needs and the expectations of their boards and their shareholders was part of the business side of things that I had to understand too. But that all came from the transparency, the honesty, the integrity. Here's what I'm telling you. Here's what it's based upon. Here's how I recommend you proceed as an alternative.
Excellent. And I know that we're slightly over time, but I'm thinking if I don't ask you this one question for my own company here at Panasonic Avionics, I'd be a little bit remiss. So I'm going to throw in one final softball to you. From your absolute professional opinion, GEO or LEO or mixed architecture? For example, here at Panasonic Avionics, we offer satellite connectivity to the aircraft. Do you have a preference from a capability standpoint that you see as the best plan?
I think a mixed architecture is the right answer for a couple of reasons. It adds resiliency, it adds flexibility. Honestly, most end users, they don't care about the technical piece of it. They just want to know that they can use it the way they want it when they need it in a reliable way. When you try and optimize for economic reasons on a particular solution, you're obviously going to be trading off some of those other capabilities. So for both commercial and national security architectures, that's why I think we're seeing more distributed architectures at different orbital regimes, because each of them can provide different key unique things that enable an overall optimization of the capability. So the personal professional opinion, mixed is best.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me throw that final question in there. So thank you so much, Colonel Hodgkiss, literally for spending this hour with Panasonic today to share your unique thoughts and your wisdom on servant leadership and additional topics. These learning and professional development opportunities are crucial to our veterans and Panasonic employees just to continue to grow and personally improve. So we genuinely appreciate your time today and joining us.
It's been my pleasure, and hopefully something I've said will resonate with folks, and they will have found it worth their time. And again, I'm happy to help others succeed. And if this is another way that I can do it, I'm happy to make my time available to do that.
Wonderful. they want to reach out to you directly on LinkedIn, that would be okay to connect and be able to connect with you in the real world.
Sure.
Okay, so next slide, please. Again, if you are a United States veteran or simply a Panasonic employee interested in participating in the Veterans Business Impact Group, we highly encourage you to reach out to our team and self-identify. Next slide, please. In every meeting, I share the Veterans Crisis Line. To reach the VA hotline, you just now dial 988 and press 1. It is that simple. If you do not personally need this number for yourself, please share this among your family and friends so we're able to spread the word. Next slide, please. And thank you again to everyone who took time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We really appreciate your participation as well. Take care.